Live from the Heartland Mamas studio, this is the Heartland Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Heidi Henry. The Heartland Mamas podcast can be heard on all podcast platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and proudly part of the Demcast USA network. Like, subscribe, and share. As of today, you have only 300 days left to save the USA from a descent into fascism. So I hope you're getting out there and doing everything you can to get Democrats elected up and down the ticket. Flip it over and get your judges elected as well. Today we're going to talk about a very deep and disturbing dystopian subject, and that's the subject of Republican phrases and buzzwords. They use these phrases and buzzwords to deceive their audience, their base. They use it to rile up their base to make sure their base gets out to vote. And all of these buzzwords are meant to confuse. They're meant to distract. They're meant to deflect. They're not meant to solve any problems. And in this time of historic economic progress in the United States, and I mean historic progress in unemployment, historic progress in wages, historic progress in economic growth. We did have historic inflation, but that has cooled greatly, and prices are starting to come down now. So people are feeling really, really good, as seen in our just finished holiday season, where we had record profits, so a record purchasing for holiday gifts. So people are feeling really good right now. So the Republican Party needs to make up buzzwords to try to get everybody upset so their base gets out there to vote. So one of their deceptive words, and I saw this on my opponent coming up for November 5th of 2024, Jed Davis, had one of the things he wanted to address was the labor shortage, the labor crisis. Well, let me tell you, there really isn't a labor crisis right now. If there really was a labor crisis, we've had all these migrants come into the United States. Some of them are eligible for work visas so they can go to work right away. Some of them are going to have to go back to their country of origin. And immigration is a mess that the Republican Party doesn't want to fix because it's great press for them, so they have no intention of fixing it. But if there was really a crisis right now, they would be saying, hey, there's a solution. Let's get those migrants to work, shall we? Because where we're lacking employees, and lacking is a pretty light word, it really sounds worse than it is in the low wage sector. Now, these are in Illinois, our minimum wage is now $14 an hour. So it's in jobs that pay $14, $15, $16 an hour where there's a problem. So these are usually jobs that are making French fries, making lattes or coffee. They're not the jobs that come with benefits or PTO or any like career level options, although some people do work those jobs as a career. But we're not finding people that want to fill them because they have no health insurance, they have no paid time off, they have a very limited ability to grow, and they're not easy to fill. And those were our frontline workers during the pandemic that we realized how valuable they were. So we started paying them better and taking better care of them, giving them some differential pay to make sure they stayed on the job during the pandemic. So we've realized how valuable they are. But by raising their wages, it caused wages in other sectors to also raise. And we've had historical events in union labor as well with the UAW and other things that have caused wages across the board to raise. So people are really happy right now, and they're not willing to go make Jed Davis's French fries for $14 an hour. And maybe he stood in the line at Chick-fil-A too long and he's really pissed about that. I don't know. But here, let me tell you why the Republicans want you to think we have a labor shortage. They want you to think it's because they can't force women to give birth to babies. They want you to believe that it's the abortion rate that caused low wage workers to not take those jobs or to just not appear for those jobs. And I have to tell you, that's not the problem. The reason people are having fewer children. Now, we do have a historically low birth uh, rate in the United States, and that's because we have terrible maternal health care. We have terrible child care prices. It's very expensive to have a child right now. It's $311,000 to raise a child to 18, and we know at 18, you probably are still helping them out financially. We have the highest number of people 35 and under living at home that we've had since the 1950s. So we are continuing to support children because wages are not keeping up with inflation, period. And this is brought to you by Ronald Reagan. So let's go back and find out, Republicans, why you might think that there's a labor crisis with low wage work. Okay. And this is because before Reagan, having a two-income household was rare when children were infants and toddlers. It was rare to have a two-income household when a child was first born for the first 5 years because people didn't have to work. A parent was able to stay home with the child or be home when school let out. All of their lives that they were at home. But because Ronald Reagan lowered the tax rate on the top income earners and took those taxes and piled them on the middle and working class and poor people, those people were no longer able to afford to stay home to take care of their child. So what happened, Ronald Reagan gave us a couple of new things that we have in our vernacular every day. And this is from Reaganomics. This is the backlash from that. And it takes the way it was planned out, it takes a while for that to fully take hold. I mean, it really blossomed when we saw the 2008 housing collapse. That was from Reaganomics. And now what we're seeing here is a very unusual thing with inflation and wages and the devaluation of workers is the fact that in addition to now a two-income household, and usually at least one of those two income earners has multiple jobs, we also have something we never had before, daycare centers. Now, we had a few of them, and we had preschool before Reagan, but after Reagan, when people had to give birth and go back to work 6 weeks later without pay, I mean, you have to stay home that 6 weeks, and nobody pays you for it, so you probably can't afford to stay home anyway. I know I was one of those people when I had my son. I stayed home for 6 weeks and did not get paid. I don't know how my husband and I afforded it back then, but it was 1984 and it was a while ago, or 86. Sorry, Chris. So after Reaganomics started, and we know we had to have a two-income family, we had to have daycare centers because you aren't going to raise your child. You're going to give birth to that child. You will never raise it. You are not going to be a stay-at-home parent. You're going to send it to somebody else to raise until it goes to school, and then school gets it. So when they have behavioral problems or issues with detachment disorder and so on, the school's going to have to handle it. But we've also cut mental health care. So I'm not sure how that helps. Now, in addition to another thing that Ronald Reagan gave us was a rise in homelessness, because with income and wages not matching inflation and devaluation of workers, we had a lot of people that they just can't afford to stay in their house for whatever reason. Now, when we started PADS in Ottawa back in 1991, we were taking care of about 10 unhoused adult white males. Most of them had profound addiction issues, and those were the people we were helping. Now, this holiday season, I worked with PADS again to get some toys and stuff, because most of the people in PADS now are women and children. It's family. So this problem has gotten worse, not better. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. And the other thing that we have that's causing the low birth rate in the United States is the fact that we now depend on food pantries to feed the bulk of women and children of low wage earning jobs. You know, those that have those jobs are dependent on the government for Section 8 housing. They're dependent for general welfare, SNAP, which does not cover enough. And they're dependent on Medicaid because those jobs don't have health care benefits. And they depend on food pantries in order to feed themselves and their families. So people are sick of this. Now you have a generation of people that have grown up with their parents on Section 8 and receiving Medicaid, that have and two parents that work all the time, so they don't have time to work on their marriage. So a lot of times they're divorced. Divorce rate is, 51% of marriages end in divorce now, and that's rising every year. And that's because people don't have time to work on their marriage. They're so busy working to support their family, right? So all of these things are why we have a historically low birth rate and why we have a low amount of people willing to take low wage jobs. So instead of blaming women for not having babies they cannot afford, I mean, let's face it, if you're making the state average wage of $58,000, you're giving up 5 years of wages for each child you raise. And we haven't even begun to talk about all the unwanted children that end up with the other 700,000 children in the United States foster care system. So before you blame women for not having babies, you should find out if they can financially afford them, why they can't, and what you can do to change that. We need better wages. We need to change our tax structure and remove the the Reaganomics tax cuts, the George W. Bush tax cuts, and the Trump tax cuts, so that the middle class, working people, poor people, working families can take a deep breath and maybe have some babies. Because right now, this generation, the generation that is childbearing age right now, no, they're not going to do it. They're not going to keep living without like they saw their parents live without, because their parents had to live subsistence living. Never coming to their ball games, never coming to parent-teacher conferences in person, never being able to show up for anything because they're wildly dysfunctional, because they're working all the damn time, and it's mentally, physically, financially stressful on their bodies and minds. So, from the edge of the Great Red Divide, this has been part 1 of Republican code word labor shortage. This is the Heartland Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Heidi Henry. Have a great day and always vote blue.